Andrew, I know quarterback's always a topic, but when you look at Miles, obviously the biggest asset, do you see any way, get the first pick, how that can help you ultimately solve the quarterback issue?
Yeah, I understand and respect, the question. We're way too premature to figure out how we're going to deploy that asset. We've got an entire season to play. We've got a group of players that we're really excited to see this fall.
I think Andrew summed it up really well late when he said, usually in a trade like this, you're trading present for future. And we're not really doing that. And I agree with him.
I agree, too. I
agree with him. That's the strange thing about this trade.
The other part of this,
Verse is a good defensive end.
Yeah, Jeff,
that's what I think people might not get. He is active.
Jeff, there's also Logan's Run here that I talk about all the time. The Browns are not really hip on players over 30. Go back and look at Andrew's history. Very, very few guys over 30 on the team.
Garrett's 9 years in.
The Cleveland Browns did not trade Miles Garrett to get Jared Verse. They traded Miles Garrett to get Shedeur Sanders. And Andrew Berry told you exactly that. You just didn't hear it. Because on the surface, this is a defense story. A franchise icon traded for a young edge rusher and 3 picks. That's the headline. That's what every NFL show ran with. But when a reporter asked Berry directly, can you see a way that first-round pick helps you solve the quarterback issue? Berry didn't say no. He didn't pivot. He paused, and then he said, "We're way too premature to figure out how we're going to deploy that asset." That's not a denial. That's a dodge dressed up as humility. And when you look at the full press conference, the specific words he chose, the things he refused to answer, the one question he almost visibly flinched at, you will understand that this trade has a second layer that nobody in the mainstream NFL media is talking about. By the end of this video, you won't just see the Miles Garrett trade differently. You'll see the entire Cleveland Browns 2026 offseason differently. Let's go.
Foundational player, Hall of Fame worthy, and a homegrown talent that's been here for the decades. And, our intent was to have him be a one-helmet player for his, and that was the truth. And even to this day, when Miles's, career is over, we look forward to welcoming him back, into the organization. But there are moments, particularly in my job, where, opportunities come up that
the Browns, I think, did very well here. Now, you could sit there and you're a Browns fan, and you're like, well, we should have gotten multiple first-round picks, multiple for this guy. And to that, I will say, you're going to really love Jared Verse. Mm-hmm. He is a spectacular young player who is very prideful and will not at all sit here and genuflect in the direction of Miles Garrett in a way of saying, I understand it. I don't think so. If you remember, he would tell a story, and McVay has told it. He had to tell him to chill out when he was a rookie, when he first showed up, because he was going too damn fast and yelling at everybody. And he was giving everybody the business, and he had to be told to tone it down. So Browns fans are going to love him.
He was born in Dayton.
And he's a Dayton guy. He's from here.
Born there, yeah.
It's not like you didn't get anybody in return. And now they've got 2 first-rounders in next year's draft, and one of them may be down at 32. I understand. But you'll be able to package together whatever you want for whoever you think is the next quarterback if you do not believe it's Shedeur and or Deshaun Watson, which I think most people in Cleveland, the latter, do not think is going to be worth even giving a start to this year. Although I would push back and say Deshaun Watson used to be Deshaun Watson, and I think wants to prove he still is Deshaun Watson, and that will help the Browns. And if you think Shedeur Sanders is the real thing, he's going to get a shot this year. These guys are going to get a shot to basically prove that what Andrew Berry has put together in terms of the draft arsenal next year does not need to be used on a first-round quarterback. But the other guys that Berry has gotten in the draft are really good.
There's a specific kind of silence that settles over a franchise when it knows it's built wrong. Not losing. Losing can be fixed. This is different. This is the quiet that comes from looking at your roster and knowing, somewhere in the back of every smart person's mind, that no matter what you do around the edges, the center doesn't hold. For Cleveland, that center was always the quarterback position. They gave Deshaun Watson $230 million fully guaranteed, the largest fully guaranteed contract in NFL history, and what they got in return was 3 injured seasons, a franchise that became a punchline, and a window that never opened. Miles Garrett was playing next to that collapse every single week, carrying a defense that kept games close enough that the offense's failures were almost forgivable. Almost. And here's the wound that still hasn't healed. Miles Garrett, the best defensive player on the planet in his prime, never played a single meaningful January game in a Browns uniform. Not one. Because the team around him could never answer the most basic question in football. Who throws the ball? That question isn't new. It has followed this franchise for 3 decades, and Andrew Berry inherited it, tried to answer it with Watson, failed spectacularly. Now it's 2026. Watson is gone, Miles is gone, the slate is wiped, and Berry is standing at a podium trying to explain a trade that on the surface looks like the beginning of a rebuild. But rebuilds don't usually include a defensive rookie of the year in 3 premium picks. Rebuilds don't come with language like short and long-term benefits. That's not the language of a team tearing it down. That's the language of a team repositioning, deliberately, with a specific target in mind.
Plan, but it really wasn't. What it did do is, honestly, probably because of a lot that was reported, that is what originally caused LA to reach out and check in, and we said, hey, look, he wasn't available. To their credit, they were really, really persistent, and then really things kind of picked up after the draft.
Are you able to explain maybe a lot of further clarity on why the date was moved back? Because it ultimately benefited you in terms of salary cap.
Watch the press conference again, not the words. Watch Berry's body language when the quarterback question lands. Every other answer in that room, Jared versus fit, the pick quality, the Denzel Ward situation, Berry addresses with momentum, forward energy, the practiced fluency of a man who has rehearsed his answers. The QB question stops him differently. He shifts. He says, I don't love dealing with hypotheticals. He redirects to the guys currently in the building. It's not evasion exactly, but it's deliberate distance. He is not closing that door. He is simply refusing to open it in public. A reporter asks, is there any way the first-round pick helps you solve the quarterback issue? Berry's answer, we're way too premature to figure out how we're going to deploy that asset. We've got an entire season to play. Now read that again. How we're going to deploy that asset. Not we're focused on competing this year. Not we believe in our guys in the building. He called the first-round pick an asset to be deployed. That is front office language for a chip in a future hand, a card you haven't played yet because you're still waiting to see the board. That is not how you talk about a pick you're going to flip for a receiver or a guard. The contract restructure earlier this spring, moving Miles' money, creating cap flexibility post-June 1st, was reported at the time as routine roster management, but Berry said something fascinating when pressed on it. Probably because of a lot that was reported, that is what originally caused LA to reach out and check in.
But, everything's still right in front of us in terms of that regard. Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
I think that you could have gotten a similar return for Miles last year, correct?
I don't know, Dylan. We didn't shop him.
I would just ask, do you think the messaging and maybe your actions have been maybe a little bit inconsistent when you talk about, adding talent and still wanting to be competitive and then going away and trading, the best player, arguably in the NFL? Do you think your messaging and maybe...
So the restructure, whether intentional or not, signaled to the market that Miles might be movable, which attracted the Rams, which created this deal, which produced a first-round pick. And now, Berry is sitting on a 2027 first-round pick from a team the NFL believes is in its window, the Rams, which means that pick, depending on how 2026 unfolds, could land anywhere from 5 to 20, could land right in Shedeur territory. The 2027 QB class, right now, today, analysts consider it potentially stronger at the top than 2025, and the Browns, coming off a roster transition year with a young head coach in Todd Monken and a question mark at quarterback, are not a team positioned to compete for a playoff spot next season. They don't need to be. They need to be positioned at pick 5 through 12 in April 2027. That is the quiet math underneath this entire transaction. When was the last time you saw a general manager trade a generational talent and then refuse, twice in the same press conference, to explicitly say the replacement pick won't be used at quarterback? Because Barry was asked, twice, and both times he said some version of, "We'll figure that out later."
Later is now the most interesting word in Cleveland. Here's what we need to understand about Andrew Barry in that room. He is not a reactive executive. He's an analytics-trained, Yale-educated GM who thinks in systems. When he says something surprising, it's usually because he calculated that the surprise serves him. And when he avoids something, really avoids it, it's because the answer would cost him leverage he isn't ready to give up yet. A reporter challenged him directly. Do you think your messaging has been inconsistent, talking about adding talent and then trading the best player in the NFL? Barry's response was fascinating. He didn't defend the consistency. He said, essentially, "I didn't expect to be up here talking about this either, but the opportunity was too great to turn down." That's a man managing his own dissonance in real time. He genuinely believed in Miles Garrett as a foundational piece, in something significant overrode that belief. The only thing that overrides the emotional attachment to a franchise icon at this level is a vision of what comes next that is compelling enough to justify the pain of the present.
Perceived locus of control. Everything about Barry's press conference posture says, "I made this happen." Not the Rams, not the market, me. He repeated the criteria, 3 things had to be true, 4 different times in that press conference. He was establishing that he had a framework. He was in control of the parameters. People only defend their decision-making criteria that publicly when the decision itself is vulnerable to second-guessing. He knows how this looks. He's pre-building the narrative that protects him if 2026 goes sideways. The narrative is, "I had a plan. I always had a plan. Watch." Pressure signature. The one moment Barry went quiet, genuinely quiet, was when a reporter asked about Todd Monken's reaction to losing Miles. Todd clearly said at his introduction that Miles was one of the reasons this job was attractive to him. So what was his reaction when you told him he's not going to have the best player in the league? Barry's answer? Todd was excited about the deal. He understood the short and long-term benefits. Todd was excited about losing the player he said made the job attractive. Either Monken is an extraordinarily loyal company man, or he was shown something about the future that made the present loss feel manageable. Think about that from Monken's point of view for a second. You're a first-year head coach. You just lost your best defender. The only reason that doesn't wreck you is if you believe, really believe, that what's coming replaces it. Not defensively, at quarterback. But to understand why this matters, we have to go back to the 2025 draft. April, the Browns hold the 2nd overall pick. Shedeur Sanders is sitting there, and Cleveland passes. Passes in a way that felt almost offensively disinterested. They traded down. The analysts were stunned. The narrative at the time was they don't believe in Shedeur. What if the narrative was wrong? What if they didn't believe in taking Shedeur at number 2 behind Watson's dead money, with Miles Garrett on the roster, with no runway to rebuild around a rookie? What if the play was always wait for the real window, the 2027 draft, their pick, potentially top 10, no dead money, a young coach who runs a passing offense, and a first-rounder from the Rams that Barry just called an asset to be deployed? Organizations don't make accidents that cost them money. They don't stumble into major structural decisions. Every move at the top of the NFL is calculated, telegraphed internally long before it's announced externally. You just have to know what to translate. Barry said that if he ever traded Miles, 3 things would need to be true. Short and long-term benefit, a young cost-controlled star at a premium position, and premium draft capital. Here's the thing. He said he always told himself those 3 things, present tense, meaning he had been thinking about the scenario.
You don't construct a three-point trade criteria for a player you never intend to move. You construct it because some part of your brain has already run the math on it. When asked about moving the contract date, pushing it past June 1st, which created significant cap savings, Barry said flatly, "I don't talk about our contract management strategies. The truth is probably a lot more boring than you think." That's not a denial. That's a deliberate non-answer wrapped in misdirection. The truth is more boring is what you say when the truth is actually quite interesting, and you'd prefer people stop looking. A reporter asked about Shedeur Sanders and the supplemental draft. Barry said they'd do the work on all the prospects and make the appropriate decision. Translation, we're watching. We're always watching at that position. At no point in that press conference, not once, did Barry say, "We believe in our current quarterbacks." He said he was focused on the guys in the building. He said Monken had a good spring. He said he was excited about the season. When coaches and GMs believe in their quarterback, they say the name. They say it with conviction. They say it multiple times. Barry never said the name. Now, here's where people are going to push back, and that's fine. The argument against everything I just said is simple. Barry is a professional. Of course he won't reveal future draft strategy in June. Of course he protects his picks. That's not a signal, that's competence. Fair, but here's what I'd say back. Competence doesn't explain the emotional weight in that room. It doesn't explain why Barry volunteered the three-point criteria he uses to consider trading Miles Garrett. It doesn't explain why a man who usually speaks with surgical precision called a future first-round pick, quote, an asset to be deployed, when the safe answer was just, "We'll see." Competent executives don't leave threads. Barry left one. Whether deliberately or not, it's there, and it points somewhere. Denzel Ward is watching this. He said publicly that if Miles were traded, he'd question his own future in Cleveland, and now Miles is gone. Barry's answer when asked about Denzel was, "It's probably most appropriate for Denzel to speak for himself." That's not a player retention speech. That's a GM creating distance from a conversation he doesn't want to own publicly. Denzel Ward is a veteran defensive back with a big contract. If the Browns are quietly moving toward a rebuild around a 2027 quarterback, Denzel Ward's role in that future is complicated. There are 53 men in that building watching how this resolves. Some of them are already doing the math. The older veterans, the ones who remember the Watson era, they know what a front office in transition looks and sounds like, and this sounds exactly like that. The season. Let's be honest about what the 2026 Cleveland Browns are. A team with a good defense, arguably still top 10, a young offensive system under Monken, and a quarterback room that no one in the building is willing to publicly endorse by name. They can win 8 games, maybe 9. They're not a playoff team. And if I'm Andrew Barry, if I've already run the calculation that this trade puts me in position for 2027, then 8 and 9 wins is exactly where I want to be. Competitive enough that the fan base doesn't riot, not competitive enough that the pick becomes meaningless. That's a hard line to walk, and it requires everyone in the building to believe in the short-term mission without knowing the long-term plan. That's the invisible tension inside Cleveland right now. The legacy. If this works, if Barry lands a franchise quarterback in 2027 around whom he builds the next great Browns era, then this trade will be remembered as one of the most brilliant long-game moves in recent NFL history. The man who gave away a legend to get the future. And if it doesn't work, if the Rams win the Super Bowl and that pick is 28 and the 2027 QB class doesn't deliver and Jared Verse turns out to be a good, not great edge rusher, then this will be what it looks like right now to half the fan base. A desperate swing that cost Cleveland its sole piece without replacing what was lost. This is a legacy-defining bet, and Barry made it without blinking. So let's return to where we started. Andrew Barry knows something about the quarterback position that he isn't saying out loud. And the Miles Garrett trade, with all its emotional weight, all its carefully constructed criteria, wasn't the end of something. It was step 1 of something that hasn't been announced yet. Because at the end of all of it, past the cap math and the press conference language and the carefully deployed non-answers, there was a real moment in that room. Barry said it himself. It was bittersweet. He's known Miles Garrett since he was 21 years old, coming out of Texas A&M, full of potential, belonging to something. And he looked that man in the eye a week before the trade went public and said, "This is a possibility." That's not an analytics decision. That's a human being making a hard call in real time, carrying the weight of what it costs to be right in a business that punishes sentiment. Whether Barry is right or wrong, whether the 2027 draft delivers or disappoints, he made a choice that will define him. He decided the future was worth the present. He decided that the wound this franchise has carried for 30 years, the quarterback question, was worth reopening one more time in the only way that could actually close it. He decided to bet on himself, quietly, carefully, with a line about deploying assets that he hoped the room would miss. Most of the room did. So here's what I want to know from you. Is Andrew Barry the most underrated strategic mind in the NFL right now? A man who just positioned Cleveland for the next decade while everyone else reported a defense story? Or did he just trade the best player in the league, create a culture fracture, and hand the fan base 3 picks and a prayer? Drop it below. I'll be reading every single one.